she lost her father, and the house that once called her family turned into her prison. Her stepmother stripped her education, turned her into a servant, then sold her off like unwanted baggage. Not to a prince, not to a rich man, but to a crippled stranger everyone mocked. On their wedding day, people laughed. They whispered, "At least she won't suffer alone." But what no one knew was that the man who limped beside her was only pretending to be broken, and the stepmother who thought she destroyed her life had just handed her over to a billionaire in disguise. Stay with me, because the moment he stood up, the entire world collapsed. Eniru learned the sound of loss before she learned its meaning. It came on a quiet afternoon when the sun was still high and the house was unusually calm. She was washing plates in the backyard when she heard her name screamed, not sharply, not angrily, but in a way that made her hands freeze in the soapy water. "Eniru!" Her father's voice. She ran inside, barefoot, heart pounding, only to find him slumped on the chair in the sitting room, his face pale, his eyes half open, but seeing nothing. That was the last time he ever called her name. By nightfall, the house was filled with people. Women cried loudly, men whispered in corners, neighbors brought food that nobody touched. Eniru sat on the floor beside her father's body, staring at his still hands, waiting for him to move. He never did. And with his silence, something else died too. Her place in that house. At first, Madame Beatrice cried the loudest. She tore her wrapper, beat her chest, called her husband's name until her voice cracked. People praised her devotion. They said she loved him deeply. Eniru believed it, until the burial ended. The morning after, the house felt colder. Madame Beatrice woke Eniru before dawn. "Get up," she snapped. "There's work to do." Eniru rubbed sleep from her eyes and stood quickly. "Yes, Mama." That was the last time Madame Beatrice called her Mama with any warmth. From that day, Eniru became something else. Not a daughter, not even family. A responsibility. Her room, the small room her father had built for her behind the main house, was taken and given to Madame Beatrice's younger son. "You're grown," Madame Beatrice said. "You can manage anywhere." Eniru was moved to a narrow space beside the kitchen, half room, half store. Bags of rice and empty paint buckets surrounded her thin mat at night. Her school fees disappeared. "School?" Madame Beatrice scoffed one afternoon. "So you can come back and disgrace us? Marriage will teach you better." Eniru wanted to remind her that her father had promised she would finish school, that he had saved money, that he had believed in her. But her father was now a mound of earth, and earth did not speak. So she swallowed her words. She cooked, she cleaned, she washed clothes until her fingers cracked and bled. If a plate broke, it was her fault. If money went missing, it was her fault. If Madame Beatrice woke in a bad mood, Eniru paid for it. "You eat too much," Madame Beatrice would say, even when Eniru survived on leftovers scraped from pots. "You walk like you own the place," she'd say, even when Eniru kept her eyes glued to the floor. Eniru learned silence. Silence kept her alive. Years passed like that. Eniru grew quietly, without birthdays, without celebration. Her body slimmed from work. Her hands hardened. Her face remained gentle, but her eyes carried something else now. Caution. The look of someone always bracing for impact. She was beautiful, but not loudly so, and that became another problem. One evening, Madame Beatrice noticed a man at the roadside glance at Eniru as she fetched water. The woman's face hardened. That night, Eniru was called into the sitting room. Madame Beatrice sat comfortably on the sofa, wrapper tied tightly, gold earrings catching the light. Her eyes scanned Eniru slowly, from head to toe. "You are grown now," she said casually. Eniru's heart skipped. "Yes, Mama." "You can't stay in this house forever." For the first time in years, hope stirred. "Yes, Mama," Eniru replied again, softer this time. Madame Beatrice smiled, but it wasn't kindness. It was calculation. "I have found a husband for you." The words landed like a blessing. A husband meant leaving, freedom, peace, an end to fear. "Thank you, Mama," Eniru said quickly, bowing her head. "God will bless you." Madame Beatrice laughed. "You will thank me better when you see him." 2 days later, Madame Beatrice sent Eniru to the market. "Buy pepper and tomatoes," she said, "and don't come back empty-handed." On her way back, Eniru noticed a man sitting near the junction. He sat on a low stool, his legs stretched awkwardly in front of him. One leg looked stiff, twisted slightly. A pair of crutches rested beside him. His clothes were old but clean. His posture was careful, guarded. People passed him with quick glances. Some dropped coins. Some didn't look at him at all. Crippled. Eniru slowed. She didn't know why. When she dropped a few coins into his bowl, he looked up. "Thank you," he said. His voice was calm, deep, controlled, not pitiful. Their eyes met briefly, and something unsettled her. Not fear, not pity, but a strange awareness, like being seen too clearly. She hurried away. That night, Madame Beatrice called her again. "You saw him today?" she said. Eniru froze. "Saw who, Mama?" "The crippled man by the junction." Eniru's chest tightened. "Yes, Mama. That is your husband." The world tilted. "What?" Eniru whispered. Madame Beatrice leaned forward, satisfaction glittering in her eyes. "I said I've found you a husband, a man suitable for you." Eniru shook her head violently. "Mama, please." "Please what?" Madame Beatrice snapped. "You want a rich man? You think you deserve better?" Tears filled Eniru's eyes. "He cannot walk," Eniru whispered. "And you have nowhere to go," Madame Beatrice replied coldly. "You match each other." Eniru dropped to her knees. "I beg you," she cried. "I will work harder. I will do anything." Madame Beatrice stood. "I'm tired of feeding you," she said flatly. "This marriage will happen, or you leave this house tonight with nothing." The words crushed the last of Eniru's hope. That night, she lay awake, staring at the darkness. Marriage had always been her imagined escape. Now it felt like exile. The wedding was fixed quickly, too quickly. No time for questions, no time for help. Neighbors whispered, "Why a crippled man? Why so rushed? This is wickedness." Madame Beatrice smiled through it all. On the morning of the wedding, Eniru sat quietly as her hair was done. She wore a borrowed dress. No jewelry, no joy. When the groom arrived, leaning heavily on crutches, his limp obvious, murmurs filled the compound. "That's him? Ah, poor girl." Eniru stood beside him, her hands shaking. He said nothing. His face was calm, unreadable. As the vows were spoken, Eniru felt a strange sensation, not fear, not hope, the unsettling sense that something unseen had already been set in motion. Madame Beatrice watched, satisfied. She thought this was the end of Eniru's story. She did not know. This was only the beginning. The wedding ended the way it began, quietly, awkwardly, without joy. When the final prayer was said, people did not linger. There was no dancing, no music to soften the cruelty of what had just happened. Neighbors offered quick congratulations and left, shaking their heads, whispering things they did not bother to hide. Poor girl. What kind of wickedness is this? Life is unfair. Madame Beatrice stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching them go with a satisfied smile. "Take your things," she said sharply. "Your husband is waiting." Eniru nodded. She bent down and picked up the small nylon bag that held everything she owned: 2 dresses, a pair of worn slippers, and her late father's scarf. Nothing else in that house belonged to her. The crippled man stood a few steps away, leaning heavily on his crutches, his head slightly bowed. He did not look at Madame Beatrice. He did not look at the crowd. He looked straight ahead. They did not leave in a car. They walked. Madame Beatrice watched them go until they turned the corner, then spat lightly on the ground. "Good riddance," she muttered. The journey felt endless. They moved slowly, his limp exaggerated, each step measured and deliberate. Eniru stayed close, afraid that if she walked too far ahead, people would accuse her of abandoning him. The streets narrowed as they walked. The noise of the main road faded, replaced by quiet, tired houses and broken pavements. Finally, they stopped in front of an old building with peeling paint and a staircase that looked as though it might collapse under the wrong foot. "This is where I stay," the man said quietly. Eniru stared at the door. This was her new life. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a key, and unlocked the door easily. Too easily. His hands did not shake. He did not struggle. She noticed. Inside, the room was small but clean. A mattress lay on the floor. A table stood near the wall. A stove sat neatly in the corner. "This is all I have," he said. "It's enough," Eniru replied automatically. She didn't know why she said it. He lowered himself onto a chair with care, grimacing slightly as though in pain. She watched closely, trying to understand whether the pain was real. "You can sit," he said. She sat on the mattress, clutching her bag. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I'm Daniel," he said at last. "Eniru," she replied. He nodded slowly, committing her name to memory. "Are you hungry?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. "Yes," she admitted softly. He reached for the stove. Eniru's heart jumped. She watched him closely as he moved. His movements were careful, but not helpless. He knew exactly where everything was. He did not knock anything over.
He did not hesitate.
He cooked with quiet efficiency. When he handed her a plate, his grip was firm, stronger than she expected. "Eat," he said. They ate in silence. Eniru watched him from the corner of her eye. He did not eat like a beggar. He ate like a man used to discipline, used to control. That night, she lay stiff on the mattress, fear crawling beneath her skin. She waited. Nothing happened. Daniel lay on the floor beside the bed, fully clothed. "You can sleep," he said. "I won't touch you." She did not respond. Sleep came in pieces. Days passed. Eniru learned his routine. Daniel woke early, bathed quietly, prayed softly. Then he left the room, leaning on his crutches, moving slowly down the stairs. "I'll return before dark," he always said. She nodded each time. When he was gone, the room felt strangely empty, not lonely, but watchful. She cleaned, cooked, waited. When he returned, she noticed things. His clothes were never as dirty as they should be. His hands were always clean. Sometimes he returned with food already bought. Once, she saw him stop suddenly, just before a motorcycle sped past where he would have been standing. Another time, he caught a falling plate with quick reflexes, then froze, as if remembering himself too late. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, pretending pain. Her heart thumped painfully. That night, she asked quietly, "Does it hurt? Always?" He paused. "Sometimes," he said, "enough to remember, not enough to forget." She didn't understand the words, but they stayed with her. Madame Beatrice visited once. She arrived unannounced, inspecting the room with open disgust. "So this is where you live now?" she sneered. "It suits you." Eniru stood quietly. Daniel bowed his head slightly. "Thank you for bringing her to me," he said politely. Madame Beatrice laughed. "At least she's useful to someone." Daniel said nothing. After she left, Eniru cried quietly. "You don't have to stay," Daniel said softly. "If you want to leave, I will understand." She shook her head. "I have nowhere else," she whispered. "Then stay," he replied. "You're safe here." Safe. The word felt strange in her mouth. Weeks passed. Eniru began to relax, just a little. Daniel never shouted, never insulted her, never raised his hand. When she spoke, he listened. Sometimes she forgot he was crippled, until he reminded her. One night, she woke to voices outside. Daniel was not in the room. Her heart raced. She crept toward the door and pressed her ear against the wall. His voice drifted through, low, firm, unfamiliar. "No," he said. "Proceed with the transfer." A pause. "Yes, quietly." Her breath caught. This was not the voice of a poor man. She staggered back, her heart pounding violently. When Daniel returned minutes later, she lay back down quickly, pretending to sleep. He stood beside the mattress for a long moment. She felt his gaze. Then he lay down as usual. But Eniru did not sleep again that night, because she knew now. This marriage was not what it seemed, and whatever truth was hiding beneath Daniel's limp, it was powerful enough to change everything. Eniru did not sleep that night. She lay still on the mattress, staring into darkness, her ears tuned to every sound, her mind replaying the words she had heard over and over again. "Proceed with the transfer." Those words were not weak. They were not confused. They were not spoken by a man struggling to survive. They were spoken by someone used to being obeyed. Her chest tightened painfully. She listened to Daniel's breathing on the floor beside the bed. It was slow, controlled, the breathing of someone who was not afraid. Morning came without relief. When daylight crept into the room, Daniel was already awake. He stood slowly, deliberately, leaning on his crutches as usual. But now that Eniru knew what to look for, the performance felt obvious. Too careful, too calculated. "You didn't sleep," he said quietly. Her heart skipped. "No," she replied truthfully. "I couldn't." He nodded, as though he expected that answer. "I'll be out today," he said. "Longer than usual." Something in his tone told her this was not a request. "I'll return late." She swallowed. "All right." He reached for his crutches, then paused. Just for a moment. His weight shifted. The pause was so brief it could have been imagined, but Eniru saw it clearly. A man who needed crutches would not hesitate to lean on them. Her certainty hardened. After he left, Eniru did something she had never done before. She followed him. She wrapped her scarf tightly around her head and kept her distance, blending into the flow of people moving through the street. Daniel moved slowly at first, limping deliberately, grimacing whenever someone looked too closely. But as they moved farther from home, something changed. His steps became smoother. His shoulders straightened. At one point, a bus sped past, too close to the sidewalk. Eniru gasped. Daniel stepped aside instantly. No stumble,
No hesitation.
no pain. Her stomach dropped. They reached a quieter street, lined with tall gates and well-kept buildings, places Eniru had never belonged. Daniel stopped in front of one and looked around carefully. Then, something unbelievable happened. A black luxury car pulled up. Then another. Men stepped out. Not beggars, not neighbors, men in suits. One of them rushed forward and spoke urgently. "Sir, we've been waiting." Sir. The word felt like a slap. Eniru froze. Daniel straightened slowly. And then he let go of the crutches. They fell to the ground with a hollow clatter. He stood, fully, easily, without pain. Eniru's vision blurred. Her legs weakened so badly she had to grip the wall to keep from collapsing. Daniel rolled his shoulders back. The limp vanished. The man who stood there was not broken. He was tall, broad-shouldered, commanding. The men in suits stood back respectfully as he walked toward the gate. Not limping, not struggling. Walking like a man who owned the ground beneath his feet. Eniru turned and ran. She did not know how she made it home. Her heart hammered violently, her breath tearing in and out of her chest as she locked the door behind her and slid down against it. Her husband was not crippled. Her husband was powerful. Her marriage had never been what she thought. Fear crashed into her all at once. Had she been tricked, watched, chosen for something she didn't understand? Her hands trembled as she tried to steady her breathing. By the time Daniel returned that evening, Eniru had already decided one thing. She would confront him. He entered the room quietly, leaning on his crutches again, his face calm. "You followed me," he said. Her blood turned cold. She stood slowly. "You can walk," she said, her voice shaking. "You're not crippled." Silence filled the room. Daniel removed his hands from the crutches. Then, slowly, deliberately, he stood up straight. The crutches fell from his hands and hit the floor. Eniru screamed, not loudly, but from deep inside, a sound pulled from betrayal and terror and disbelief. "You lied to me," she cried. "You let them laugh at me. You let my stepmother sell me like an animal." Daniel's face tightened. "Yes," he said, "I lied." She staggered backward until she hit the wall. "Why?" she demanded. He met her eyes fully now. "Because I needed the truth," he said. Her laughter came out broken. "And what about my truth? What about my life?" "You chose kindness," he said. "Every day, even when you thought you had nothing to gain." Tears streamed down her face. "I had no choice," she sobbed. "You had character," he replied. "That was the choice." She shook her head violently. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Tell me now." He took a deep breath. "My name is Daniel Kingsley," he said, "and I am not poor." The room felt too small to contain the words that followed. He told her everything. About the companies, about the money, about betrayal from relatives who tried to have him killed, about women who pretended to love him for his wealth. "I disappeared," he said. "I became invisible, weak, useless, so I could see clearly." Eniru slid down to the floor, crying openly. "And me?" she whispered. "What was I to you?" "A miracle," he said quietly. "One your stepmother never intended." Her breath caught painfully. "I never touched you without permission," he continued. "I never raised my voice because I needed to know who you were when you thought I was nothing." She covered her face. "I thought my life was over," she cried. "I thought I had been buried alive." Daniel knelt in front of her. "I will never let anyone humiliate you again," he said. "Never." A knock came at the door. Daniel stood. "Come in." The door opened. Men in suits stepped inside, heads bowed. "Sir," one said, "everything is ready." Eniru stared in disbelief. "What is ready?" she whispered. Daniel turned to her. "The truth," he said. 2 days later, Madame Beatrice hosted a gathering. She invited everyone. She wanted to show off. She wanted to mock. She sent a message to Eniru. "Bring your crippled husband. Let people see what you married." Eniru read the message with trembling hands. Daniel smiled calmly. "She wants a show," he said. "She will get one." The compound buzzed with laughter and music. Then the gates opened. Luxury cars rolled in. Security flooded the compound. The music died instantly. A man stepped out of the lead car. No crutches, no limp. Perfectly tailored suit. Madame Beatrice's drink slipped from her hand. Daniel Kingsley walked forward, and beside him, Eniru. Upright, calm, unbreakable. The woman who had once been discarded now stood at the edge of a truth, powerful enough to destroy everything her stepmother believed she controlled. And the lie that had defined her life was finally dead. For a long moment after Daniel Kingsley stepped into the compound, no one spoke. The music that had been playing moments earlier died in an awkward, unfinished note. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Laughter evaporated like it had never existed. All eyes were fixed on one thing: the man who was supposed to be crippled, standing, walking, whole. Madame Beatrice felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Her fingers trembled as the glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. The sound was sharp, final, and embarrassingly loud in the silence that followed. "No," she whispered. "This is not funny." Daniel did not respond immediately. He walked slowly, deliberately, across the compound, each step confident, unbroken, undeniable. No limp, no weakness. No trace of the man she thought she had discarded as worthless. Eniru walked beside him. For the first time in her life, she did not shrink. She did not lower her eyes. She did not apologize for existing. She stood tall. Madame Beatrice's mouth opened and closed, searching for words that refused to come. "You," she finally said, pointing at Daniel, "you are crippled. I saw you, You saw what I allowed you to see," Daniel replied calmly. His voice carried easily across the compound, not loud, not aggressive, controlled. The guests shifted uncomfortably. Someone whispered, "That's him. I've seen him on television." Another voice murmured, "Kingsley? The billionaire?" Madame Beatrice's knees weakened. "No," she said quickly. "This is a lie. You are trying to disgrace me." Daniel stopped a few feet away from her. "I am not here to disgrace you," he said. "You did that yourself." The words struck harder than a slap. Madame Beatrice turned desperately to the crowd. "This girl, she plotted this. She is ungrateful." Eniru flinched instinctively. But Daniel felt it and squeezed her hand gently. "No," Eniru said quietly. The sound of her voice surprised even her. "I didn't plot anything," she continued, her words trembling but steady. "I didn't even know." The crowd leaned in. "I was sold," Eniru said. "I was humiliated. I was told I deserved nothing." Madame Beatrice lunged forward. "You lie!" Daniel raised one hand. The men in suits stepped forward instantly. Documents were placed on a table. Phones were opened. Names were read aloud. Figures were mentioned quietly, but the weight of them bent the air. Madame Beatrice's business loans, her properties, the companies she depended on, all connected, all fragile. "All contracts tied to Madame Beatrice's name have been suspended," one man said evenly. "Effective immediately." Madame Beatrice staggered back. "You can't do this," she whispered. "You can't take everything from me." Daniel's voice was calm when he answered. "I am not taking anything," he said. "I am simply stepping back into my life." He turned to her fully. "And you," he added, "will step out of hers." The crowd gasped. Madame Beatrice dropped to her knees. "Please," she cried. "I raised her. I fed her." Eniru closed her eyes. Memories rushed back. Long days of hunger, nights of tears, words that cut deeper than blows. She opened her eyes again. "You did not raise me," she said softly. "You endured me." The words were quiet. They were devastating. Daniel spoke again. "You will leave this house tonight," he said. "You will take only what belongs to you, nothing more." Madame Beatrice sobbed openly now. "I don't want revenge," Eniru said suddenly. Daniel turned to her. She took a step forward, her voice steadier now. "I don't want her punished," Eniru continued. "I just want to be free." The crowd fell silent. Daniel studied her face, really studied it. Then he nodded. "She will leave," he said, "and that will be enough." Madame Beatrice was helped to her feet. No one met her eyes as she was escorted out of the compound. Her power left with her, unnoticed, unmourned. The gates closed, and with them, a chapter of Eniru's life ended forever. That night, the city lights blurred past the window as Daniel drove. Eniru sat beside him, quiet, not overwhelmed, just empty. "You don't have to say anything," Daniel said softly. She nodded. When they arrived at the house, she stood in the doorway for a long time. The place was calm, warm, real. She stepped inside slowly. For the first time, no one shouted her name. No one ordered her to move faster. No one reminded her of her worthlessness. She walked from room to room, touching walls, sitting on chairs, opening cupboards, half expecting the world to correct itself and tell her she did not belong there. It didn't. Later that night, she sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded. "Why did you choose me?" she asked quietly. Daniel didn't answer immediately. "Because when you thought I was weak," he said at last, "you never tried to control me." She swallowed hard. "People think kindness is submission," he continued. "It's not. It's strength without noise." Tears slid down her cheeks. "I didn't know my life could be like this," she whispered. "Neither did I," he replied. Weeks passed, slow, gentle weeks. Daniel did not rush her into anything. He did not parade her wealth or announce her transformation. Eniru returned to school. She sat in classrooms again, older than most students, but eager, hungry for the knowledge that had once been taken from her. Daniel watched quietly from a distance. When people asked questions, he answered only one. She chose kindness when it cost her everything. Eniru grew, not just in confidence but in presence. Her posture changed, her voice strengthened, her laughter returned. Yet she remained gentle. One afternoon, she stopped the car near a roadside stall. A man sat there, his leg twisted, his body worn by hardship. A real cripple. Nkiru stepped out and knelt beside him. She placed food into his hands. The man smiled. "Thank you, my daughter." She smiled back. As they drove away, Daniel glanced at her. "You didn't have to stop," he said. "I know," she replied, "but I wanted to." He nodded. Years later, people would tell the story differently. They would say a crippled man married an orphan and became rich. They would say luck saved her. They would say fate intervened. They would be wrong. Because the truth was quieter. A girl who had nothing refused to become cruel. A woman who was humiliated chose dignity. And when power finally came, she did not use it to destroy. She used it to live. And that was the greatest victory of all.